Well, hello, welcome to episode 105 of Retropower Uncut. And you'll see next to me a coffee machine. Now you may, if you've watched us for a while, realise we're synonymous with making cheap instant coffee. You might even say this business was built on cheap instant coffee. However, I think it's time we upped our game a little bit, and the YouTube comments would certainly suggest that the public opinion is poor of our coffee choices normally. And Simon at Roundstone Coffee obviously agreed with this and decided to come to our rescue. So we now have a super fancy coffee machine, bean to cup, that can do all of these fancy little drinks here. And one of the things I really like about this machine is the fact that you don't actually have to touch it. It's kind of a touch screen, but it detects when you're 2 centimeters away, so we don't get tons of horrible dirty mechanics fingerprints all over it. So I'm going to have myself one of these. What I will say, while that's just making that, is one of the cool things about Roundstone Coffee is that the beans, which are down here actually, as you can see in this bucket. Ooh, yes. The grounds from making the coffee go into this spare tub here, and they are then returned to Roundstone, and they are then made into cakes that they fire their roaster on. So the used grounds are then used to roast the beans for the next batch, which is quite a cool idea. So the only thing that is devoid on this machine is that there's no Bovril button, and as you know, come the winter, it would be nice to have Bovril. I've already been opening up the machine and looking inside and thinking, well, there's a chocolate vessel in there for doing the hot chocolate here, and that's just full of powder. And I thought maybe we can like tamper with that, fill it with Bovril powder, so when you press the chocolate button, Bovril comes out. The downside would be if you pressed Mocha, you'd get a coffee and Bovril hybrid, which might be very bad. But anyway, thank you very much, Roundstone Coffee. Top-notch coffee. They also supply the machines, great for the workshop because of the, as I say, the contactless touchscreen. And the mugs I'm drinking from are, of course, as ever, available in our shop. Anyway, enough about coffee, let's go and look at cars. I have to say, after years of drinking instant coffee here, this is insanely good. But we need to cut down on the quantity, I fear, because we'll all be shaking. Okay, E-Type. Last week, I think I showed that the UJs for the steering column had arrived. Jim's now machined up the steering shaft for this and got that in situ, which was the missing link to allow us to do the mounts for the steering rack. So he's just in the process of drawing those up. In fact, I think he has drawn the first iteration of those up now. It's just doing a 3D print so we can trial that and then make any changes if necessary. Hopefully there won't be any, and then when we're happy with that, we'll get some mounts machined from billet, and they basically will bolt onto the original mounting points on the shell here, and then go through the mounts on the forward rack there. So that is looking good. The other big area of work at the minute George is on with is on the bonnet. So I think I talked previously about the fact we'd made the decision to do a carbon fibre bonnet for this, and we were trying to come up with an efficient way of modelling the changes onto the original bonnet physically, so then we can pull moulds off that to do the carbon bonnet. And obviously we could make kind of any number of checking jigs and things, and the body shop guys can sort of bulk it all up with filler and get it to the right shape, but it's quite a long-winded process to get right that way. So we came up with an idea of making a sort of exoskeleton of sheet metal pieces that are going to fit over the top of the original bonnet, which we'll then still fill it all, but then they can sand down to those exoskeleton segments to very quickly achieve the right shape. So that's the plan at the minute. That's what George is working on. There are some complications with that, a bit of thought gone into it to make sure all the positions are right. So we've got little dimples on the ones that sit this way, the sort of transverse ones that will line up with the seam on the top of the bonnet to make sure they're positioned correctly this way. We've cast a plane down the sill in the CAD and set them 90 degrees to that, so when we're tacking those to the bonnet, we can use a laser cross set to the sill with a vertical to get all of those vertically correct. There's a little bit of thought around the arch lip, because actually our new one is smaller around the arch lip, it's narrower, so we've got to cut the arch lip out and then have enough thickness on our sort of skeleton and a back part of it to support the sort of filler that we're going to put over that, and we'll have to fabricate an arch, the revised arch lip. But I think the plan is falling into place pretty well with all of that. The only thing we're probably going to do is make a couple of additional longitudinal ribs that go up, that we're going to tack onto the underside of the bonnet first before we cut the arch out, so that it's still got some stiffness in, because we're a bit worried about when we cut that arch out whether it'll kind of just be a flappy bit of metal. And we're also going to do, when we do all of the transverse profiles, we're going to keep the negative of each one of those, so we can then use that as a checking jig for checking it externally when we're doing the filler work. And then of course we've got the triple check, if you like, of being able to rescan it again after we've done that to check it still matches the CAD. So that's the plan on that. Looking good. Let's move over this way. Mustang, a little bit of progress. We finished the seat mounting subframes, happy with those. They've gone through to Mark to paint. Adam's just fitting the carpet now, because we're sort of homing in on test driving stage now. We identified the leak on the power steering was a seal in the sort of hydraulic ram. Again, a brand new part, obviously with a fault. So we've got a seal kit coming for that, which will hopefully rectify that, at which point we'll be able to test drive. So we're getting those seat subframes done. We can put a spare set of Recaros in for the minute, as the set that we're actually using in this are away now with Dean at Trimworks, who's going to do the upholstery. We're just doing them in black vinyl to match the back seat, and then we're going to use the little metal sort of tabs in the back there to go in place of the Recaro badges on the front seats, so it kind of all ties in. And he's going to do a similar spaced rib design on the centres, so the front seats, although they are sort of 80s Recaros, they'll tie in visually with everything else. So that's where we're at with that. It's actually a relatively sort of short progress episode, this episode, because of the number of days. We normally film on a Thursday, which we are doing today. Last Thursday, the day after last Thursday, the Friday, the guys finished sort of half a day to go to Retro Rides gathering at Mallory Park, which was awesome. And I was away on the I went away on the Thursday night to go to the Goodwood Revival on the Friday as well. So there was a little less progress at the end of last week, and then of course there was a well-known funeral on the Monday this week, so we've actually only done Tuesday, Wednesday this week essentially. Anyway, Stratos, it's all hands on deck with this at the minute, really getting it ready for the IVA test next week. Lots of little changes here and there. Anybody who's been through an IVA will know all the little details of the regulations that you have to comply with, so things like the markings on the reservoirs for the type of fluid with the appropriate logos on them. We're going through the electronics, making sure all the appropriate warnings are on the dash to comply with the rules on that. I've done the LCD rear view mirror on it now, that's up and running and it looks great. We've got a really good field of view with that. We've retrofitted the earlier incarnation of the intake ears on there, because we were concerned that there's one bit on the revised design which is very, very borderline. I don't think it would be contacted. It's the inner edge where it meets the body. They use like a 100mm sphere to determine what items have to comply with the radius regulations, and it's borderline whether it's contacting that 100mm sphere or not. But we thought, well, we might as well just take any doubt out of the equation and put those back on, because they definitely pass. We're putting the standard Stratos louvers in the back. That's actually just to do with the glass. It's kind of an odd one in that not many cars have a window in them which isn't the window between the outside and inside, but our rear louver panel has got a glass window in it. And although it's toughened glass, it's not E-marked, and we were that's a grey area in the regs. We know that all glass windows between the outside and inside have to be E-marked. I suspect that one would need to be as well, so for the sake of argument, we're putting the original louvers in at the minute. We've done the number plate light installation on it now. The VIN plate's just being engraved for it at the moment. John's just working on the headrest installation, because the seat dimensions, there's rules around all of that and how the headrests have to be, and they obviously have to be present. So we're doing that. Steering wheel, you'll notice it's now got a Mazda MX-5 steering wheel in there. So again, due to radius requirements, etc. on the interior. So it's just at the moment ticking through all of those jobs. And then Bobby is building the exhaust insert, which I think we showed at the beginning of last week, but it's essentially building an insert that goes into the existing exhaust cans, which has got much more silencing, baffling, different tailpipes. It's even come up with a tailpipe design that kind of feeds in around the outside and then out in the centre to give it one more sort of area of baffling, as well as everything in the silencer. And it's got a catalyst in each silencer box as well, and that essentially is just all going to slot in as a single unit with a revised tailpipe that has the required radius requirements on that as well. And then that can be interchanged with the original if we want to. And then Saturday we're going to be doing a mapping session to do a revised map with the cats to get hopefully the emissions to where we want them to be, and hopefully then we'll be all set. So fingers crossed. I mean, with these IVA tests it's usually best to aim to pass but expect to fail is probably the best way to describe it, because there's a lot of things to think about. Gordon's car, for example, we did fail the first test on, it was only on some very minor things and I can't remember what they were now. One was emissions and we needed to do a few little changes on that. That was a very difficult car to get through emissions, not because it was a particularly inefficient engine. It was very hard to hold it in the required rev range because of the roller barrel throttle bodies and the sensitivity of the throttle, and you have to hold it at like a fast idle, which I think is between 2 and 3 thousand RPM off the top of my head. And actually, because the engine was so responsive, such a light flywheel and roller barrel throttle bodies, it was just a problem of actually holding it in that range. So yeah, I think we're as set as we can be. So I'm going to hand over to Nat on that note. There are beanies in the hat with winter closing. Beanies in the hat, beanies in the shop with winter closing in. Hoodies available as well. So check out our shop and knock yourself out. Here's Nat for the metalwork.
Well, hello folks, thanks to Cal for the handover and welcome to the Retropower Fabrication Workshop for another week of progress. We're going to start with the Mark 1 Escort again, but the other Mark 1 Escorts compared to the one we started at last week. This is the one that's progressed a little further. As you can see, it's on the 2-post lift now. Obviously you'll be aware of where we're at with the project loosely. Progress this week's been on several fronts because I've been working on it a bit, Tom's been working on it a bit, and Scott's been working on it, and George has been working on it. So it's had a few hours spent on it this week, although it's quite a short week so far. I'll start at the front. We're fabricating a new slam panel, as we talked about last week. That's progressing quite well. There was a couple of complications. In my initial sort of estimation of how to lay it out, I'd overlooked part of the inner front panel and how that intersects with the slam panel. And so we've done a little bit of a redesign and a reprofile of the front of that, which has worked well. Scott's got on with that. We cut a section of the drop part out. We hit the point where I couldn't actually stretch the material any further on the drop section at the front of that panel. We hit the limit on the ability to shape that any further. So we actually cut a small piece out, created the profile that we needed for that, and then TIG welded some new pieces in, which Scott's just done, and it looks really, really good now. That all clears nicely. He's also done some work on the inner sections to basically make everything marry up, square to the front of the car, follow the grille profile, keep the headlight, keep centered to the headlight aperture and all that sort of side of things. And it's basically all fitting together really quite nicely now. We've also got a different front panel for this Escort and the other Escort. We've got the Magnum Restorer quality. We changed, originally we were going with the panels without the round holes in, without the extra vent holes in. There's a change of plan. We've changed to the panels with the vent holes in, but we're using the Restorer quality panels, which are a little bit crisper, a little bit nicer pressing. It's not perfect, but they're a little bit closer to a really good. They're nice and crisp, and they do look a lot better. So that's been put on there, and again everything's been aligned. The top edge of that's been modified slightly to marry up with the new slam panel, and it's all come together. Yeah, that's all coming together quite well. A few more tweaks to do. The next step is, and I think I mentioned it last week, possibly, I can't actually remember where we're at now, we're doing billet pieces for the bonnet striker and the bonnet safety catch. I think I mentioned it last week, but if I didn't, basically instead of having the bonnet safety catch and the bonnet striker directly engaging with the painted metalwork on the front of the car, they're going to engage with some bolt-in parts that are made of stainless steel, so the areas around those don't corrode and it's not messy and horrible. It's just nice and neat. So that's the next stages on that, is to work out where the pressings have got to go to receive those billet parts, draw the billet parts and suss out how all that's going to work. So I think Scott's going to be making up some pointers so we can engage them with the bonnet, shut the bonnet, that'll mark the front panel, give us the centres accurately where they've got to go, and then we can work from there with that. Moving sort of forward to the middle part of the car, George has basically step back from that slightly. What George has been working on is scanning the car. The reason for scanning the car is we've had a bit of a discussion to the exact plan for making the wheel arches. And we've determined that we're actually going to do the wheel arch, the initial roughing out, we were going to do that in clay. We've had a slight step back from that and decided we're actually going to do it in CAD. We were going to do it in clay because it's a little bit easier to work in clay, assuming you get fairly close to the final result first time. But it's quite hard on the front of the car because there's a really great bubble arch in the way of where we need to stick the clay. So we need to create some sort of surface to be able to put the clay to it there, which we don't have at the moment. So there's actually quite a chunk of work involved in just getting it to the stage where we can put clay on it at the front. And since the arches are not going to be enormous on this, they're not going to be huge wheel arch extensions, we've decided that actually the better way will be to just do it in CAD, because they'll be small enough that we can actually 3D print in several sections the sort of first draft of the wheel arches and actually try them visually on the car as a 3D printed part. So the route we've decided to go is to scan the surface of the car so that initially we can actually generate the wheel arches in CAD, view it in CAD and actually assess the sort of the general appearance of the car all in CAD before we even think about doing anything in any other material, any real material. So that's what George has been up to, just getting all that scanned, getting all the surfaces put together, getting the model generated as a mesh within the Peel to CAD software that we use, which is incredibly powerful software to get to a stage of having a CAD model from the basic scan data. It's really, really clever. So that's what George is working with at the moment. And then moving more onto the back of the car, it's where Tom's been busy, which is the easy bit for me because I can see it in front of me, which prompts me and reminds me. Tom's been working on the boot floor. He'd started that last week. He's now finished that. He's used the Pels nibbler, which most people in the metalworking world would probably call a pull max because they're the most common ones, but ours is a Pels. He's used that with a large round beading tool to put a large T-shaped bead into the boot floor, and then he's used the nice new powered bead roller now from Matt at Stakesy's Metalwork Machinery. He's used that power adaptation bead roller to do the embossing in the floor, in the boot floor, which is basically a loose match for the embossing on the forward section that covers the differential and the rear part of the exhaust ahead of the axle line. In parallel with that, I've been working on getting all the blank pieces made. I'm going to hand over to the final metal finishing and fitment to Tom, but to get us ahead a little bit, I've been just getting all the blanks drawn up and cut for the rear parcel shelf sections. That's being done in 3 sections. There's a section each side with a return on it. In fact, if you wait there and I run over here, I'll go and grab one. Here we go. Should have had me props on hand. Basically, we have a blank, which is drawn up like that, and plasma cut, which goes in at the side, and that's it. Once it's been joggled there, a nice little joggle along it, and then folded like that. That then welds to the side of the turret, welds into the inner quarter panel, and then the parcel shelf sits onto that joggle and will be stitch welded to there. That'll be stitch welded into the shell. There's one of those each side, and then the centre section of the parcel shelf, and then that has holes in which will access the rear strut tops, and then there'll be a reinforcer section from the top of the turret up to the parcel shelf, which will be tied into the parcel shelf around there. That'll tie all that lot together, and that'll all be stitch welded into place. So that's the other part of the work on the rear of the car that's been going on, and that's pretty much where we're at on this project. Moving on from there, we'll walk round to this side. There's a Stu. Here's Stu. Stu is working on, Churchill obviously, he's working on the transmission tunnel. He's been doing a prop centre bearing mount, which is also combined with the seat cross member effectively. So he's made the profile sections up, rolled them, shaped them and welded them in place to make the prop centre bearing mount. He's then worked on the gearbox cross member mounts, got those into the floor. And he's now working on, I think, are you on the reinforcer for the gearbox cross member mount now?
Yes,
yeah.
making actual
Transition piece. Yeah. So he's working on the tunnel transition section for the middle. So basically it'll be a large tapered transmission tunnel over the gearbox itself, and then there'll be another tunnel section from the back of the gearbox to what was the original seat cross member where the prop centre bearing goes. And the transition between the two will also double as a reinforcer to carry the load across the car from the gearbox mount, from the actual main transmission mount. So he's creating the sections, the patterns for the sections for that at the moment in cardboard. We'll then get all the steel cut for those and then make those transition pieces, and then you can make the rear section of the tunnel and the front section of the tunnel as two separate pieces. So that's the next stages on the transmission tunnel. And it's interesting to note that you'll see that quite a lot of the work for the Escort has been done as sort of two-stage CAD. We made a cardboard template in quite a lot of cases and then turned the cardboard template into a CAD template as in computer-aided design, and then plasma cut the parts. And the reason for that is we know with the Escorts that we need at least two of everything. Or maybe more if I get one of them wrong, but certainly we're doing two cars. And at that point, that's kind of the tipping point where we go from, on this car, we're only doing one. So with all these parts, it's probably quicker for Stu to do the cardboard work, make the cardboard piece, transfer it to steel, cut it by hand, and it's done. As soon as you have to make two parts, then you kind of tip the other way, and it's actually probably quicker to draw it and actually cut it out on the CNC plasma, because then you've got your two bits ready and done. So it's very good when you're duplicating parts. That's where we tend to go away from just purely cutting everything by hand over to using the computer-aided side of things a little bit more. So there's a contrast there. But yeah, that's Stu's on with the tunnel, progressing away, and you'll see some more steel work filling the middle of the car next week, I think, on that. Moving on, the booth lights, if they were on, they've just been turned off. There's a batch of parts in there which have just been painted with Black Direct, which are for the seat mounts for the Mustang. The Chevette crossmember that you saw last week that Scott had been repairing, we've now repainted, stripped the powder coat off that and repainted that, so it's all nice and ready to go back to the customer. And a couple of other parts that I forgot. Yes, a couple of other parts that I've largely forgotten what they were. So we'll go into the body shop. In here, we're working on primarily E-type, but also, as you can see, with Steve's working over there doing the dash for Kaiser. We've got pretty much all the parts ready to go on that now, so they're all being prepped and painted and bits of priming going on, and generally getting all of those ready. They're being hydro-dipped, aren't they? Yeah, so we're getting all the prep done ready to get those wood grain hydro-dipped, basically. You've probably seen us doing that on various other projects in the past, but we'll be doing I believe it's a 3M film that's used, but we send them to a company called Wicked Coatings in Southampton to do those. We've used various others and we've had mixed results, whereas Wicked Coatings always seem to have been pretty good. We've always had a good result with them. So that's what's going on there. In the meantime, Gaz has been working on the front end of the E-type, and we've basically been battling that. We're pretty close though now. We're getting pretty close now. The mouth, which you'll recall from the previous episode, had to be reworked quite heavily on the bonnet, is requiring a little bit of final fettling, which is what's currently going on. But the key step forward has been that the front end is now all bolted together. Everything's been lined up. All the paintwork that was going on last week is all done on the inside, so that we've got a painted finish through all of these join points. We've got a painted finish through all of these points, so we've not got any unprotected areas. It's very difficult on these. There's so many joins and seams and bolted joints and glued joints and goodness knows what underneath. There's so many. Basically, if you wanted to design something as a rust trap that's it. It's almost perfect design for that. So we've gone to quite a lot of trouble to try and make sure that it won't rust, which is a fairly extensive job. We've gone to quite a large extent to make sure there aren't rust traps. Wherever there are rust traps, we've treated them and made sure that they're thoroughly coated in something to protect them so that they don't rust. That leads me then on to the really impossible area to do properly, which is that on the Series 1 E-Type, on the point where the wing joins the bonnet centre section below the headlight, going from the headlight down to the front bumper, there was a small trim covering a panel join. On the Series 2 and 3 E-Types, that panel join line, which is bolted, is then welded and lead loaded, which is just a crazy design, but that's what it is. And so we've done that. We've actually TIG brazed that join up. It's in Sifsil copper 968 rod, which I use quite a lot for that sort of thing. So we've TIG brazed that join line up, and now we've metal finished that, and now Gaz is on with basically just doing any filler work needed around the nose and on that area to basically get it all the correct shape and all ready and finished, so that we can get the outside ready for paint, which we're getting quite close to doing. We've got a few more little bits to do. We've got to trial the chrome work on the doors and drill the holes for that. Double check a couple of other bits of chrome work, but we're getting pretty close now, aren't we, in terms of overall shape. Yeah, in terms of overall shape, we're getting pretty close. A little bit more messing around with the headlamp areas, and as I say, chrome on the doors. And we need to double check the bumper fits, front and rear, make sure that everything lines up and that the bolt holes aren't miles out and things like that. But we're generally pretty close now. So yeah, all good progress, and I think that pretty much sums up where we're at in fabrication and bodywork.